Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Horse Geeks podcast, where we look at horses and riding from the inside out. I'm Kirsten Nelson, professional horse trainer, and with me is my co-host, Deb Romero, certified Alexander Technique instructor. And today's topic is going to be about what a balanced horse feels like.
Oh,
Because that comes up a lot. Like if you don't know, you don't know.
I mean,
So
everybody thinks that just out in nature they're balanced, but maybe that's not true.
that would be like saying all people are well balanced.
Yeah.
It's just not the case. But
We
before we
all
get
have work to do.
yeah, and before we get into that topic today, I have a couple of announcements. One is thank you guys very much. A client emailed me some random list of the top 100
Oh,
horse-related
that's right.
podcasts, and Horse Geeks got rated as like number 24. It's very exciting. I knew
Yay!
nothing about this list. A client
Cool.
found it and texted it to me, and I went, woohoo. So I'm so glad because we don't get a ton of comments and we
We
don't get a
we
lot of
didn't
stuff
we
back.
don't get attaboys.
Yeah. So we were just kind of wondering if we should even continue with the
Right?
podcast, right? We're up to this is 173. And we were sort of like, does anybody really like it?
Is anybody
And
out there?
not that we need a pat on the back. I mean, we do
No.
this because we love it. But
Right.
sometimes it is nice to know that it's helping
Mm.
people or that
Yeah.
people find it useful. So, anyways, being rated number 24 was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for that, for all of you guys who listen and pass the podcast around and share it. And hopefully it helps you. Um, Couple of old horse ladies
I
talking
know.
stuff, right? So the other thing is I wanted to announce again, and I will put some links in the show notes and links in the more or the description box on YouTube. But I will be presenting at the Art of the Horseman Online Horse Fair 2025. That is going to be February 22nd and 23rd. It's all online. I'll put a link in for free tickets, and you can find me there as a presenter. Kirsten Nelson, and I did 4 different videos for the horse fair. So those will
Cool.
be, yeah, kind of all about training for optimal balance, but there's lots of useful stuff that's related to the core concepts that I work with. So you guys can Google Art of the Horseman Online Horse Fair 2025 and find your way there, or I will put some links in the notes in the stuff today for that too. So that's all the housekeeping business. Because last time I forgot to mention that up front and it was at the
Oh,
end. And not everybody listens to our long rambles the whole for the whole
oh, really?
podcast. It's true. Okay, so back to the topic, what a balanced horse feels like.
What is
And
that?
this was such an interesting discussion. We had
Yeah,
this
it
discussion
was.
yesterday in our online group, um, which is called Wexford Student Group. And we were looking at a video of one of our members riding her horse and really trying to stabilize the hindquarters. Big draft. He's actually a Percheron thoroughbred cross,
Hmm,
but he really looks like a Percheron.
he does.
And I think the rider is probably, I don't know, 100 pounds soaking wet. Like she's a
Maybe.
tiny, tiny little thing. And to watch him get lighter and more stable through his own back and hindquarters was really exciting.
Yeah, it was.
And it opened up that discussion about how do you recognize when the back is lifting, when the skeletal coordination is getting better.
Mhm.
And so that was such an interesting discussion. And I thought Jenny put it really well that she feels the difference in the movement when she's riding, that instead of the movement happening to her, I think
Mhm.
she said she feels the movement, but it's happening around her.
Yeah, it's not, she said it's not happening to me. So the horse isn't jostling her everywhere.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that that is succinct. That's exactly it because I don't recall in my 50 some years of riding ever getting on a horse and going, "Oh, wow, this one's balanced."
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you learn to ride what you have, so the feeling of
Right.
every horse is different. But what's different horse to horse, some horses feel easy to guide, easy to ride, have
Hmm.
lovely gaits. That's closer to what balance feels like. And other horses that we say have bad conformation, they have jarring gaits, or
Yes.
my favorite that kind of makes me smile a little bit is my horse is such a big mover. And
Big mover. I've
yeah,
got one of
you
those.
have one of those.
She throws catapults me everywhere.
Yeah, and she got a lot of accolades from dressage trainers and coaches and judges because she was such an animated mover.
Very animated mover, but very hard to ride. And that's another phrase that we hear a lot, hard to ride.
Yeah, or it's hard to sit that big trot. Like that's
Yes,
sort of saying that the movement is good, but it's hard to ride. And I
right.
go, the more I learned about mechanics and skeletal coordination, I go, no, no. Those
That's
two
not
things,
balance.
those two things cannot go together. They don't go
Right,
together. And even like when I worked with Jean-Luc, we discussed this same thing because you always hear how people struggle to sit the trot on these big horses or big moving horses or beautiful moving horses. And he goes, when the trot is balanced, you don't work to sit it. He
right,
goes, so when you're really struggling to sit the trot, you should be posting because that's an unbalanced trot.
right.
And it doesn't matter if you're riding a Mustang, an Arab, a warm blood, a draft horse. It's the coordination of the skeleton being more mechanically correct that really stabilizes the movement because it's
And that's the same for people. I mean, it's no different.
so
That
how would
or
you describe it in people or how do people describe it
I
if
think we use the same language. We've talked about it before, and we use it a lot in the Alexander community. That ease, it's effortless. And the central nervous system knows. I mean, it's like all the wrinkles on people's faces go away. It's
yeah,
like this, it's so amazing because it's just like this light bulb goes off, like, oh my gosh, that's what that is? Well, that seems so simple. Why couldn't I find it before?
yeah.
Yeah,
And it is kind of like that. Like it's something that's available to us all the time. And the
right.
same for a horse. Because it's sort of the most efficient use of the design of the body. That's what we're aiming for. And
Good
so, of
point.
course, if we're working efficiently, we're going to have more energy because we get better fuel mileage, right? And we're not going to feel the struggle and the
Right.
strain of sort of misusing the mechanics of the body. That's always going to take more energy and it's going to create more effort.
And you brought up a really good point. We are all very attracted to leg movement and placement, where we really need to move our eyes up further. The same with people is we need to look at the head, neck, back, and pelvis. What's going on there? The legs are just a response to what's going
Hallelujah,
on above.
sister. I know, because that's why when when people start looking at tracking up, I just sort of
Oh,
go, where do I begin?
I know. What do I?
Like, we're just looking, you're looking in the wrong place.
Right,
And even a client of mine who's studying to get her judging certification for dressage is like, that's what people are looking at is
right.
headsets and leg placement and speed and energy.
Oh,
And I
that's
go,
right.
but nobody's really looking at the top line or the coordination of the skull, spine, and pelvis. So I see like this lady, she's so funny because she brings me pictures from the internet all the time and goes, what about this horse? What about that horse? And
I
I
just
go,
cover my eyes, going, "Oh no, no."
I'm really careful. I don't want to come across as arrogant or that I'm
Right.
doing so much better than anybody else. I go, it's just a problem in our industry.
Mhm.
I go, but once you can see, you can't not see and you can't unsee once you can
Right.
see. And so, very diplomatically sort of saying, this part looks pretty good, but
Mhm.
I'm still seeing this part. And then her eyes started to develop, and she comes back and she goes, I'm so shocked how many of these upper level videos and photographs I'm looking at, the horse's pelvis is so tilted on
It's
this
tilted,
turn or during
dumped,
this lateral
yep.
work. It's just
Rotation,
completely
yep.
rotated to be low on the inside instead of level across the top. And I go, but everybody's looking at leg placement. So they're not
Right.
realizing that stress that's being put on the sacroiliac joint with the pelvic
Right.
bones moving that much. That's a constant sort of disengagement, which is going to reduce the power and agility that the horse has. It's not going to increase it.
Yeah,
So,
and it's kind of like with people that go to a doctor or physical therapist to treat my knee hurts and not even question the organization of the whole system.
right. And just start
Right.
tweaking the knee with range of motion stuff.
Right. Right.
Right.
Where it's the use of the leg and the entire body that created the problem, not just the knee. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And it's the same with the leg placement of the horse. That's directed by how the spine is being
Right.
used and the pelvis, not the other way around. And so a lot of times when we're using ground poles and hill work or even tapping with bamboo poles and whips to try to get the horse's hind legs further towards the center of the body, they are
Right.
just contorting the spine in order to do that. So I
Well,
go,
that's a
that's
mechanical effort, not a natural organic effort. Like we talked on our last podcast about the downward transitions need to be organic. They need to be stimulated by the horse so that the horse can achieve the level of organization to do it correctly.
right.
Right.
No, and when you really study the functional anatomy or mechanics of the horses, I go, the hock joint has 5 bones and rotates medial and laterally every time it flexes and extends. How are you going to control that? And the upper part, rotates laterally while the lower part rotates medially,
A
and
torsion, yeah.
and it switches from between the braking phase and the pushing phase. So I go, that is some complex joint function. And there's no way you're going to control that directly or even indirectly, but it is organized through the central nervous system.
Right.
So, depending on if the skull, spine, and pelvis are not stable, that joint function has to be restricted through the hocks because the body's requirement for stability is sort of the highest requirement. Otherwise, we would fall over. We couldn't do anything.
Right.
So the joints fill in, providing stability to the body, even though their job is mobility.
Mhm.
You can't have excessive mobility everywhere at once because you just fall over.
Well, and I think we've talked about this before is are we creating stability in the appropriate place?
Yes. And finally, that brings us full circle back to the topic.
Yeah,
Yes, because where the stability, if we look at the body's design, the axial skeleton of the skull spine, it technically includes the rib cage because it's attached to the spine and the pelvis. I go, that axis of the body is where the stability is meant to be, that part of the skeleton. And even if we go way back, we did those podcasts on muscle fiber types,
yeah,
and all the muscle fiber types that are supporting the axial skeleton have the most stabilizing muscle fiber types in them as
right,
opposed to locomotory. And the outer muscles that support the limbs, which is called the appendicular part of the skeleton or the appendages, those muscles are even a different fiber type, more
Right.
locomotory, less stabilization. So the design of the body says you got to be stable in the midline if you want to save the wear and tear on the limbs, the joints, even taxing the locomotory muscles, because everything in the body can be used for stability. And that's a very
That's
important
true.
feature.
We can use the wrong things to stabilize ourselves. This is
Right,
true.
right. And that's what horses do too. If their back is unstable or they're restricted through the head and neck, and that can make their back and pelvis unstable, that restriction of the head and neck, then they're going to have to stabilize muscularly and through the limbs.
Somewhere else, yeah. Yeah.
And
And
it's
it's the
not,
same with people. I mean, your spine needs to be stable, or in another word, still organized as one unit
yeah,
so
because
that the
if,
arms and legs can do what they need to do.
right, so if we look at balance in the simplest of terms, whether it's a horse or a human, the body is meant to be most stable through the skull, spine, and
Mhm.
pelvis. We can throw the rib cage in there too, right? So skull, spine, rib cage, and pelvis. When that part of the body is stable, it increases the mobility of the arms, legs, or limbs,
Right.
right? And that is how a body in motion is always managing stability and mobility, right? And the better we get at that when it's more mechanically accurate, which means the stability is in the part of the body designed to be stable, and the mobility is in the part of the body designed to be mobile. And when we work with the coordination that way, according to the design, we increase power and agility. We
Oh,
become
yeah.
more athletic.
Because everything is easier. It's more available for what it's supposed to be available for.
Yeah. And that's why you get that effortlessness feeling
Yeah, it's
is
like, what did you say? It was equalized forces equals zero sum. I thought that was so geeky. I loved it.
that is truly geeky.
That's
But
so geeky. And I was like, oh, Kristen, that's a good one. I like that one.
but to me, like I still see people who are really well educated in biomechanics, and you see this too with massage therapists, physical therapists,
Mhm.
people who are super well educated in functional anatomy are still trying to get the changes they want through a manipulation of muscle and bone.
I think
And
you said that. I wanted to go back to that because you were talking about holding the neck or something. What was it that you said? And I was wondering what you meant by that. Because if we try to, it's kind of like trying to breathe organically, but if you think about it, you don't breathe organically. If you try to manipulate it.
I don't get what you're saying. What do you
So
mean?
there's a lot of breathing techniques where you count four in and count four out, for example.
Oh, right. So breathing can be conscious or unconscious. Is that what you're
Right,
saying? Okay.
right. So if in my world, if you're doing it that way, that is a mechanized way of breathing. That is not how the body works. The breathing is like an ocean. It depends upon your emotional state, your physical state, your are you exercising? So every breath in and out organically is different. So mechanizing it does not create healthy breathing.
So trying to consciously control it doesn't
Right,
necessarily give you the benefit you think it's going to give you.
exactly.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm not quite sure how that ties into where I was going,
It's the
but
manipulation of us thinking we can control it or fix it and get.
well, if you think of the body as so integrated, like you're talking about the
Mhm.
breath is part of the movement. The
Right.
move, right? And I'm saying kind of the same thing. How a horse moves, the leg placement, the use of the head and neck, whether they're smooth to ride or bumpy, it's like all of that is a whole body picture. that's
Right.
super, super complicated. So by just moving one leg 1 inch, you have no effect on this complex system, and you're probably going to lead or encourage dysfunction because it
Mm.
was manipulated, like you're saying with the breath,
Right.
right?
Right.
But when you look at the body as a whole system, if we think of any coordination, right? So as soon as we generate movement, which comes from a thought, we begin the pushing phase, we stabilize during the braking phase, and we have to balance stability with mobility during movement. And all of that, if we look at it through the lens of physics, suddenly it becomes a lot simpler. So every little tiny change in soft tissue use or bony coordination in our horse is going to change or alter the direction and magnitude of forces that we perceive, that we feel.
Right.
And that to me is a far easier way to work with this insanely complex coordination of the body. I go,
Mhm.
and it's the same thing you did. You went from a medical massage therapist where you did kind of manipulate the meat and
Right.
bone into the Alexander technique where you guide but allow discovery,
Right.
right? And I kind
And
of
we
went,
do it through mostly through movement, where granted you can get some healing done without movement, but if you don't retrain the organism while it's moving, it's going to recreate the imbalance
it's a lot
again.
more wear and tear too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and for horses, feeling kind of a stable line of force through the midline is the feeling of good mechanical use of the skull, spine, and pelvis. And that's what Jenny was saying yesterday is as the coordination is getting better, she described it as sort of she's working on pelvic engagement with her horse. And even though he's humongous, he's pretty wobbly and weak in his hindquarters. And like
Hmm.
typical draft, really wants to overuse the neck. So she's doing stuff to build up the stability of the pelvic bones and really improve the engagement. And without asking him to lift his back, that stability started to be felt by her under the back part of the saddle.
I
Not that
agree. Yeah.
not that she felt the back dropping, but she wasn't
Mm.
feeling the back lifting. And so it was almost like a
Mm.
gentle upward force that came through the back of the saddle first and then kind of worked its way up towards her seat bones and her legs. And there's so much stillness because when
Hmm.
the body is stable, where it should be stable through the midline, it's organizing all the forces of motion and it's equalizing all the forces of motion. So, what unseats us as a rider is poor coordination generates a lot of different directions and amounts of force. And that is what we feel when we ride that we struggle against. Right.
Right.
So just to keep our stability and we jam our heels down in the stirrups, we grab mane, we do whatever. But it's like that feeling of a jarring ride or a lot of turbulence or
Hmm.
bumpy, right? Or
Or if we
big,
have to grip, that's a big thing.
or even when we put it in a complementary fashion, like a big mover, right?
Big mover.
Big mover. I go, it's still that jarring effect on our body is exactly what tells us that the spine is not well coordinated, which
I think
means,
that's a really good point, the jarring effect.
yeah, even with your mare who used to just launch you, like you could hardly post the trot because she just
You had to
catapulted you.
decelerate the post.
Yeah. And it was like now, as she stabilized through her back and pelvis, according to the design of her body, she still has beautiful movement, but it's easy to sit the trot, or easier, I should say.
And I
She's not
think I
quite
tried to
there.
describe it yesterday too, and it's this throughness that comes from the back end, like Jenny said, up under you.
Hmm.
I
And
don't
it's
know
such
how
a hard
else.
thing to describe because
Mhm.
a balanced horse is so easy to ride. It's
Exactly.
just incredibly easy to find your place, walk, trot, or canter, because that coordination, that correct coordination of the mechanics, it equalizes the forces of motion, left to right, front to back, and up to down. And so when you equalize, when you coalesce forces, so they're not going south by southwest, they're going north and
Hmm.
south, right? Or they're going east and west, but they're not going into these little like pocket areas. That's what
Right.
destabilizes us as a rider. So, ideal skeletal coordination is coalescing those forces into the three directions of front, back, left, right, up, down, and and then balancing each opposing direction. So, front, the amount of force up front is balanced with the amount of force out back, and the same thing left to right. And so when you equalize opposing forces, you get a zero sum effect, right? Plus one minus one equals zero.
Right.
So if I've got plus one over here, minus one over there, I feel zero force. And it's so hard to describe because
Oh.
I always feel like on a balanced horse, I'm literally in the eye of the hurricane. It's like I can feel the movement all around me. I can feel the muscles working. I can feel the legs working. I can feel the power of the horse. But there's nothing fearful about it. It just feels incredibly stable and safe and incredibly powerful and agile. It's both of those things at the same time. And I think our concept is we get one or the other.
Ah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But a balanced
And it's
horse is
not,
really
it's like
both.
this glimmering moment and then it's gone.
Yeah, I think we've all felt it by accident.
I think so too, because
I
I
think
think
every
that's
rider has felt that moment of balance
and never maybe
spontaneously.
not recognized it for what
Oh,
it was.
I think we all recognize it, but
Ah.
we can't get back there on purpose. That's the
That's the
problem.
problem with my work too, is you think you can find it, hold it, keep it, and it's not that.
You can develop it.
Hmm.
You can train the body to keep discovering those moments of balance, but that is kind of changing the nervous system, changing the coordination of
Right.
the body. But every rider, especially when their horse gets the first few strides of balance when I'm working with them, almost like 99% of the time, the rider will say something along the lines of, I felt this before. It was when
Ah.
I was going down a hill and my horse spooked and then didn't spook. And it was like, the stars aligned and there was a
Yeah.
moment. There was sort of a moment, but that feeling is familiar to every rider I work with. They recognize it and it feels incredible.
Mhm.
And
It's the same thing with my work too. When they find it, it's like, oh, I remember that.
yeah, there's a memory of it, but
I think so.
nobody helped us find our way there on purpose.
That's
And that's
true.
where you come in, where I come in, is how do we start finding our way there on purpose? And what was so exciting about that conversation of feeling the coordination develop, we feel it by the horse becoming more stable.
Hmm.
And this is even true with my clients who drive. It's like the cart gets more stable.
Yeah, it's not rattling. Or
Yeah,
I've even heard it. You know, some horses at some point you hear clunk, 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 and then the clunk, clunk, clunk goes away.
yeah, their feet land softer.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
softness, and I hear it with people too, the softness of landing once you learn the correct way to move. Everything's softer.
yeah. And I mean that if you think of this gets a little mind bending, but I go, if we kind of put the function of the mechanics is to manage forces, whether the forces are internal or external doesn't matter,
Mhm.
right? The body is a force management machine.
Right.
And we all figure out how to not fall over, even if we're using the
Mhm.
wrong parts for the job.
Right.
And horses do the same thing. But I go, when we learn to change those habits of coordination and use the right parts for the job,
Mhm.
that is better force management, whether we're talking
Mhm.
internal or external forces. And so stability, the feeling of incredible stability,
Mhm.
is always the result in the center of that body.
Yes.
And whether we're talking a central axis, head to seat bones, or nose to tail on a horse, or we're just talking the center of that center, that's what Jenny was describing with that sort of feeling of a platform being built underneath her from the back
Mhm.
of the saddle that gradually moved forward. That is the correct use of the horse's back. That's what
And
it
I think
feels
it was
like.
I think you even mentioned that sense feeling of width.
And width too, yes. A lot of
Yeah.
people will describe it
To
as,
describe it as a, oh, why does my horse feel wider?
mhm.
Yeah.
And physically, the legs get wider. So horses that are
Hmm.
considered base narrow, it's usually just a lot of muscular tightness that's trying to play the role of stability through the
Right.
legs. And when you bring that stability to the midline, the legs just start rearranging. And so the horses offer a square halt. It's not something I train for. They offer a square halt.
I
They
think that is
widen the
so
legs.
important because it's not about the legs again. I mean, we think it is, but the
Mhm.
legs are what should happen after the head, neck, back, and pelvis are organized to
Yes.
get the balance.
But it's even true. It's so funny. People do it to themselves. So almost all the time when I first start working with somebody on the ground, especially if they're working with their horse and playing with the metronome or music with hand walking or some
Hmm.
exercise where we're starting to play with the pushing braking balance, the first thing people do when they have to walk to a tempo, like especially with a metronome, is they look down at their feet and they try to control their feet and their legs to walk
Hmm.
in time with the beeps, and they can't get it. And it's like, because it's not our feet,
It's not the feet.
it's our central nervous system that
Hmm.
organizes the feet. And
Exactly.
so when I get people to look up and I say, put the metronome, imagine it inside your belly and walk from there and bring them back to the central nervous system, then the feet fall into the tempo perfectly. But as long as people are trying to place the feet,
Yeah, taking big, huge steps.
or just this mechanical robot looking
Yeah,
step,
the
because
mechanicalness of it all.
yeah, you can kind of
Yeah,
tell when people are trying to make their feet do the thing rather than
right.
just letting the central nervous system organize it.
Exactly. That's a really good way to point it out.
Yeah. And so we do it to ourselves, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
how we look at horses too, is we need the feet to do this. And I go, well, the feet are organized by the central nervous system. And so what was
That's why it takes Alexander teachers to get somewhere a long time because we're so focused on using our central nervous systems well, we don't really care when we get there.
Yeah. But you do get more efficient. So there's this
Yeah.
weird sense of time bending that
Yes,
and people find it exhausting at first to
it
walk
is.
on the ground to a metronome, because once they start to organize their movement from their central nervous system, it's like it kind of gives you the sense of time slowing down, but it
It
doesn't.
feels like that, but it's not. You're right. The time doesn't slow down. You just become more efficient.
Yeah, and they what it
Yeah.
does is kind of give a sense of you're somehow moving slower or taking more time. But from the outside, if I'm measuring the miles per hour of the walk, it
Hmm.
actually hasn't changed, or sometimes it increases.
Yeah.
And I go, but it doesn't feel like that to people. And that's kind of what it feels like in the saddle. When a horse
Hmm.
balances, it almost feels like time slows down,
It
or
does.
or it feels like the horse is going slower. And
Hmm.
that's why a lot of people blow it, is because they think, oh, my horse now lacks energy, right?
Right.
And I go,
They're just
no,
super organized at that point.
yeah.
Yeah,
And you
I like
see
that.
this like my favorite competitive riders, especially I love watching show jumping. And if you watch a really good show jumper, usually they're over 50, right? So they're starting to get efficient. And when you watch them go around the course, I even saw this in eventing across country. There's no rushing or anxiety or hurriedness. And so they look like they're just having a leisurely ride.
Right,
And the rhythm being consistent almost gives the appearance that they're going slower, but
right.
they're more
Because the level of
agile,
organization, yeah.
right? And so then the agility gives them a better turn, right? A tighter turn, better setup for the fence, so less faults. And so they come in time and they have fewer faults. And a lot of times they win, but it didn't look like this big guided missile around the jump course. You know what I mean? There just
Yeah, I know
wasn't the
what you mean.
same level of effort. Like, Margie Engel is one of my favorite riders, and she's a
Hmm.
tiny person who rides these humongous horses.
Hmm.
And sometimes when they do a playback on TV, you realize how fast she's going when it's in slow motion, but it never appears that way while she's just going around the
Right.
course.
It's just efficient.
It doesn't look as fast as she's actually going. And
Right.
that's what balance feels like. And so for some competitive minded people, they can't stand what I do because it feels like everything is slowing down.
I get that all the time. I'm too slow.
I'm
It's
too
too
slow.
slow.
It's too slow.
It's too slow.
And I go, but once you rewire for efficiency, you increase power and agility. It's also how you overcome pain issues. You and I do that
Mhm.
work too. And for horses, it's how you move past chronically bad behavior. But it's like that agility and power that is under control. There's nothing else better to ride. I go,
No,
that's just the whole reason I ride is that feeling.
finding, yeah, looking for it. It's seamless. That's another word. It's just, yeah,
Yeah. But I thought Jenny put it really well because she started to notice, and she's a tiny person on a big horse, so I'm sure she
yeah.
noticed the difference of being moved by the horse
Hmm.
as opposed to feeling the movement around me, no longer affecting me directly. And
Right.
that is exactly what it feels like. I go, there's a stillness.
Hmm.
You still feel the waves of energy. I think you said it that way, that you
Yeah, it
feel,
feels like a wave when it's organized. It's like a whoosh that comes from the back to the front
yeah,
of the horse. And you can feel like it, like a wave coming, and you feel the width happen in the rib cage up to the shoulders.
yeah. And that's why
Yeah.
I love that classical term throughness, because it does
Yes.
feel like the
Yes, it
energy
feels
goes
like
all
that.
the way through.
Yeah.
But I think people equate swinging back and throughness with
Mhm.
a bumpy ride that's hard to sit.
Or that you have to manipulate it to get, I see a lot of heavy manipulation with the reins
Or the legs and the
or the
spurs.
legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not what it's about. It's just this level of organization that meets in the middle.
Well, and that still comes from the idea, just like you see with some physical therapists, the only way to get there is to physically manipulate bone and meat,
Mhm.
bone and meat or soft tissue.
And I get
And it
that.
really
I get that.
isn't.
I
Hmm.
mean that is a maybe a door opening, but it's like when we injure ourselves, it's that time to step back and go, how did I get there?
Yeah.
And people will start, instead of thinking I could actually organically organize myself all the time and never get hurt,
Or at least be less prone. Never
less
say
prone to
never.
getting hurt, yeah. And at least not, by what you're doing with your body anyway.
Right.
And the same should go for horses to
At
find
least you're
that
not
level of
doing it to
organization.
yourself.
Right. Not usually, not me.
Yeah. No, and the same for horses, where, and this, I think we've talked about it before. Exercise itself doesn't mean you're going to strengthen the body because it kind of depends
Mm.
on how you're coordinating during that exercise, whether you're strengthening the body or depleting it. And so a lot of horses, because we don't have a really good working understanding of horse balance. As many of hundreds of years of we've been riding horses, the research on their functional anatomy is really pretty recent. And
Right.
so we're kind of going by interpretation, and it's hard to interpret because you would initially think move with the horse means physical gestures, or a swinging back means it's going to bounce your body around, or that wave of force you feel through throughness is going to upset you like a wave in the ocean.
We should overfeel it.
And none of those things are true. And that's
Mm-mm.
what's so hard to describe because if you can't do the math, then the only way you can describe physics is metaphorically.
Mhm.
But that's so open to misinterpretation, especially over the years, over hundreds of years. We think we know what it means, but we could be dead wrong.
Yeah.
To me, I feel a swinging back as so easy to sit. I don't feel a
Because
swing.
it's an internal movement, not an external movement. I
Right. So
think
it
that's what we
doesn't,
talked about. It's not visible.
it's not even, you don't even feel it because a swinging
Right.
back is an equalization of the
It's
back
an
muscles.
availability.
Yeah. So when the back muscle use is equalized, you get really, it's more you see the leg movement start to swing, but the back doesn't make a swinging motion like a swing you
Exactly.
get in at the kiddie park, right? But people interpret it that way. Or even
That's
Schwung,
true.
right? Schwung is like swinging back is sort of the English interpretation of the German word Schwung, but it doesn't, like even Schwung, it doesn't mean a swing like a child's swing. That isn't what
Right.
you feel,
Misinterpretation.
right? So I kind of stick with the word throughness because it's invisible.
Yeah.
And I really like the stillness in the middle. Like
Stillness.
the movement is no longer hard for me to be quiet and still. It's
Right.
easy.
It's easy. That's the
Mhm.
that's the best way to describe it. It's easy.
It's easy, it's effortless to keep my balance, but I still am aware. It's almost like if you could be in a pool of stillness, like if you were in a quiet hot tub in the middle of the ocean. It's like the ocean is all around you, but you're not really being affected by it. There's like this pool of stillness in the middle, but you feel all that power.
That is so much of my work can we stay in our own stillness and still be involved with everything around us?
Yeah, and if I were to describe the forces of motion that are generated by ideal skeletal coordination, it's that.
It's that.
It's like plunking your hot tub in the river and just watching the river go by
Go
and
by.
enjoying the power, but you're not really at the mercy of the river or the ocean.
Right.
You're just sort of like observing. This is
Right.
lovely.
This is lovely.
Yeah, so we better wrap it up there. We've been yapping quite a bit because it is a hard topic to talk about,
It
but
is, yeah,
I hope that helps you guys because even if you get on your horse and you've been struggling to learn how to sit the trot, it's like maybe have a rethink. Maybe that trot needs to be balanced. Maybe it's not you as a rider. Maybe it's a dysfunctional coordination during the trot
right.
because that would be hard to ride.
I know it.
Yeah. All right, you guys. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Please join us at the Art of the Horseman online Horse Fair 2025, which is February 22nd and 23rd, coming up soon. Hope you can join us there, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next episode.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks so much.